Hello and welcome to the 2024 Wagon Quilt Company Saturday Sampler. I'm happy that you joined our YouTube, and if you can like this video and subscribe to our channel, we would really appreciate it. This is month 6 and we only have 9 months of blocks, and then month 10 is finishing. So once you're finished with these blocks, you will be 2/3 of the way finished with our quilt along, which is kind of exciting and really fun. I think that you're starting to see some things take shape. Some things are being repeated and some things are we're doing some techniques that we've already done. There is a video this month because of some of the little nuances, but you'll find that a lot of the techniques that we're using are similar to other months. And in fact, these blocks are companion blocks. They are the same size and somewhat similar in tone to our very first month of blocks. The colors are super similar and the shape is exactly the same. So I think that you'll kind of like to see that. Once again, we are making some full blocks and some partial blocks, and you'll see that in your instructions. Everything should be pretty straightforward, and I hope that you really enjoy making these blocks with me this month. I think they're really fun, and coneflowers are one of my favorites, and I'm just so happy that that cute little right-facing bee from month 4 is going to finally have a home. This month, we will be making 4 different colored blocks, and some of those blocks are in pieces, but our first one is the orange block, and it's all in one whole block. And that's the basic template for all of the blocks. It's the main one because it's the whole one. And so we're going to go ahead and start with that one so that you get the feel of all of the rest. So you can see that I have taken my orange pieces and I have set those aside. Everything else is on the side of my cutting board, and I actually put all the purples together and all the blues together and all the reds together. So I just am working with my oranges, and then I have some backgrounds that are set to the side as well that are all labeled. And I highly recommend labeling this month because there are so many little moving parts this month. But we're just going to start with the very first row of the orange blocks. So I'll just set these a little bit to the side. I know that I am using 2 of this light orange, and then this black center, and then 2 of the background AAs. This is the light orange A's, the center, or the black B's, and then the 2 double A's. And we'll just take it step by step, and you'll see that it will all come together just really nicely. So I'll take my A piece and I'll just set it there. And I'm not really lining it up with my mat necessarily, but I am lining up these sides really nicely. And then because my mat is a little bit dark, I can see right here is where the bottom fabric intersects with that top fabric. It's actually a little lower than that. So I'll make sure that when I mark it, I'll do it a little bit lower. And I'm going to be really, really fussy with this because I want it to be exact. Otherwise my block won't turn out because we're using those bias joins. So I will mark a diagonal line on the back of that. And then I will immediately go ahead and pin that together so that it doesn't shift around while I'm taking it to my machine. And I'll double check that it hasn't shifted. And then I'll go sew that and come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, now before I really trim this, I'm going to double check that this is exactly where I want it to be, that my lines are going in the same, like they're along the same axis there, and that my diagonal is going the right way. I'm going to double check every single one of these because on my test block, I did make some of these wrong and then they were upside down. So I will double check, and yes, that is the way that it needs to be. So then I'll just trim about 1/4 inch away from that, and I just have my little tiny trimming scissors. And then I will press that open. I found that pressing open really helps with the bulk of these seams. Okay, and you can see that that's pretty straight along both of those edges. Now, the next part is this. And the way that I think of these, and I hope that this helps you, is when I want to go up the stairs, then I will put my piece so that the extra bit is going up. And when I want to go down the stairs, then I'll put my piece so that the extra piece is going underneath, if that's helpful at all. And I'll just line that up, and I'm actually going to use my mat just a little bit because it's easy to line up with those squares. These are 2 inches big, and so it's easy to line up with those squares. So you can barely see this, but I can see it a little bit better, and I will be able to see that with my machine. And I will take a pin and make sure that I'm not shifting anything. You can see there's just a sliver more up, so I'm going to make sure that that's super square before I actually sew. Yes, everything's looking really good. So I'll go sew that and then double check that it's going the right way, trim it off, and press it open. Okay, now you can see that the next part will need to go attached this way, going up the stairs. So I will make sure that I orient that like this, going up. And I will just make sure that I mark, because the black is dark and the mat is dark, then it's a little harder to see. So I'll just double check that I'm in line with that square corner behind. And then I'll mark this. And I'll pin it. And then I'll sew it and make sure before I trim it that it's going the right way, and then come back. Okay, now you can see that row 1 is finished. I'm just going to put it up to the top, and then I'll prepare my next block. So I will need 2 of the background BB units. I'll need 3. This is the final 3 of these light ones. And then I'll need both of the dark ones, which are C. So these are the A's, these are C's, and these are BB's. And I'm actually going to scooch just a little bit, these last bits, just so that I can get to those when this is a little more consolidated, but it's the same thing. I will take this AA, or the BB, and put this on top, directly on top. Mark, just a tiny mark in that corner. And then draw on the line. I have found that drawing the line instead of using, for example, diagonal seam tape is a lot more accurate. And so for this block, because I want it to be really, really accurate, I am going to be drawing the lines on every single one. So I'll just go ahead and go sew that, put it together, and then I'll just continue just the way that I did with row 1, and I'll make row 2, and I'll come back when that's all finished. Okay, now I want to show you one more thing. This is oriented the wrong way. You can see in your pattern that it's actually supposed to fold the other way. So I should have oriented it with the extra part going up. I actually oriented it with the extra part going down. But all is not lost, because I will just take out this. I'll remark the line going the correct way so that this is going above instead of below. And I'll show you that right now. The thing about seam ripping is that nobody likes to do it. Nobody prefers seam ripping, but it's a necessary part of quilting, and even for experts. I follow a lot of bloggers and none of them is perfect. And that's okay, because most of our mistakes are really figure outable. And especially if we're testing to make sure that the block is going the correct orientation. So now I'll put that same block back down. You can see it's got a few little needle holes, but it's going to be just fine, because once I press it a little bit more, then those will disappear. And once I get it all quilted, you won't even notice. So I'm just remarking my line going the correct way. And I just happen to line up on that diagonal line. Isn't that funny? So now I'm going to pin it. You can still see the other line, but I know that I want it to go ascending, and it'll be the same on the back as it will be the way that you sew it. So I'm going to pin right close to where I'm going to start my seam, which is up in this corner. I'll start there and then go down this way. So I'm going to pin it so that I don't accidentally sew that wrong seam again. Now, because I'm checking my seams, then that is the correct way for this block to start. And that's exactly what I want. This little pencil mark, I'm just going to erase. If you have a friction pen, you can heat erase it when you press your block. I'll just do my best, and then it won't show up on the other side. So I will trim that and get going, and then I will finish my row and then come back and show you. And just like that, you have row number 2 all completed. So I'll go ahead and set those 2 rows aside, and we are going to now make row 4. Now, row 4 has some really fun little moments in it. And we're going to be using some of DD background and CC background. And you can see that some are little and some are big. And that is totally on purpose. And the reason for that is so that everything will fit together. Now, because we cut quarters from this one and halves from this one, then when we sew these ones together, then these will be slightly smaller because there's a seam allowance than this, and that is okay. It's all going to work out. They're oversized quite a bit so that you can trim them down, and that will all work out. So for the very first, we're going to take our dark orange D square, and I'll just put, like I said, I'll put everything to the side and not worry about those other things for right now. We'll take the quarter square, and remember, when we cut our quarter squares, then this is the straight edge that we cut, and you can see it all come together. And the reason why we do some half squares and some quarter squares is so that all of these are not on the bias. So we will be starting with a bias seam, and then our second seam will be a bias seam, but these will all stay square. And I'll just put those to the side too. So I'll first join these two together, and I like to do that by putting them right sides together and then sewing so that I see the orange. And whether it's the orange or the white, I like to make sure that I start at the top of the right angle right there. It's so much easier to start on a straight than it is on this diagonal. You'll get kind of wonky and messed up that way. So we'll start there. And now you can see I've pressed that seam open. So now this is just slightly smaller than this half triangle. And you can see that, like, when I put this together, it kind of folded. I'll repress that so that it's straight before I sew, but then I'll put right sides together and sew it. And then I'll have this cute little left-hand piece. Okay, now you can see that that is one square. We will trim this block to 3.5 inches square, and I actually like to use my 3.5 by 12.5 inch ruler. If you have a 3.5 inch square ruler, that's great too. But you can see I have a 45-degree line on my ruler. So I'll turn my block so that my 45-degree line is right there. And then right in the center at 1 3/4 inches, 1 3/4 is half of 3.5 inches. And so that intersects that line right there, and that's where the point of our block should be. So I will just really, really carefully line up both my 45-degree angle and my point, and I'll make sure that the corners are both intersecting those diagonal seams. And then I'll take my rotary cutter. I like to start just a little bit in and go back just tiny. I'm not going to go back so that I cut myself just a little bit. And then I'll go forward and I'll do the top at this point too. If you have a rotating mat, that works great. But I'm just showing you with what I have. So now I will line up the line again right along that seam line, and then make sure that my corner is right where those two intersect. And I'll do the side and the top again. And now I have a 3.5 inch, and I'm calling it a quarter square, even though we didn't make this second quarter part. But it's still kind of a quarter square triangle because that one is the quarter square and this one is too. So that is the completed one. Now I'll do the same thing, but for the right facing, or the right square. And I just like to lay it out first so that I can see exactly what's going on. And then I'll take this, and I know I want to sew on this seam, so I'm going to flip it so that I can start on that right square angle. Line it up really nicely, and then I'll sew it right here, press it open, and then sew this part on. As I am trimming this, I'm going to give you a couple more little tips. As you are completing your blocks, especially with these bias seams and with the other bias joins that we're making, because we are sewing on the bias, if you are holding your fabric at all tight, it actually will work against you. And so you just want your machine to do the work. You shouldn't be pulling your fabric at all as you are joining these pieces together. If you do, you will get a wonky block and it won't line up with your ruler. And at that point, I would redo it before you trim anything. So, okay, so there is the right facing square, or the right square, sorry. It's the left square and the right square. All right, now we are going to make the middle square. This one is a little bit tricky, and you will see why. So first I'm taking a green F, and I actually have two of those, or just one of those, yes. And we will take our two background double E. And we're just going to sew that together, just like a regular block. It's not going to be exactly what it's going to end up being, but you'll see what we'll do in a minute. So I'll just do that, and then we will press this to the background on all of these. We will press this to the background. Okay, and here's the completed block. Now, if you double check your EE pieces, they are not a standard width. They are actually 2 1/8 inches. And the reason for that is so that this ends up being 4 3/4 inches, just like your background CC and DD pieces. and your other quarter squares. So the reason for that is so that when you cut it, it will be the same size as those other pieces. And when it's square, then you can just cut it corner to corner, which is what I'll do here. Just really carefully, I am rotating myself and my things instead of my mat. If you have a rotating mat, even better. And I'm being really careful to cut that right on the diagonals. Okay, so these two pieces we will discard. This one we'll save for the red block, so I'll just put that with my red block. And then we will make the rest of this with the light oranges on the sides and the dark orange at the top. And you can see that this is a true quarter square triangle. We just have a pieced piece in the center. So now I'll just take pairs and put those together and then put those pairs together. And the way that I have asked you to press is towards the light orange. And that's so that the seams will nest when you're doing that. And then once we're done, we will trim it to 3.5 inches, just like before. So just to show, I have made these two halves and I press towards the light orange. So then when these two go together, you can see that they will nest really, really nicely right there in the middle. And then I just like to put in a couple more pins. I learned with pins, and so I use them all the time. And I'll put a couple more pins down there so that I can get a really square block. Now you can see I've got this cute little quarter square triangle block finished. And I am not going to pay any attention to this green, but what I am going to do is line up, just like before, the center and the sides really, really nicely. And you can see that that green will be centered in your block if you're being really careful with your seams. This is a little bit of a fussy block, but I think that the results are worth it. Okay, now we've got our right square and our left square and our center square, middle square, I guess. And now I will take two of the background pieces, and you can see that that's going to be the row. So I'll just go ahead and sew those together and then press them as directed, and then row 4 will be finished. Okay, you can see that I have put out my block or my units really basically in place. So this is the green H and the green G. Now I want you to pay attention. This green G will have the long side on top and bottom, and then the short sides on the sides. If you're ever confused or wonder, you can measure on your cutting mat, or you can just fold up the corner, and where it's not covered, that's the longer side. So I know that that's the longer side. And then this is background GG and HH. And if you get these mixed up, it's going to be fine. Your block will look just a little bit different, but for this one, we want it to look like the ones that we're doing further on. So the bigger square is going to go in the top left corner, and then the smaller square in the bottom right corner. And we're just doing corner triangles with those. So I'll just take the first one, this GG and the G, green G, and I'll go ahead and mark a diagonal line on the back of that GG. I'm just doing it on top of my block because I've already put it in place. You don't have to do it that way. And then I'll go sew. Now I'll do my second corner square, just like this. Mark the line, sew on the line, trim, press, and then come back. And then I'll just continue with the rest of the block as outlined in our instructions. And here is row 5. Now, the reason for pressing towards the green here and the background here is so that these two will nest together really nicely. You can see that those will line up together and they will be great. And then we'll just put these together. Now, my biggest tip for this part is to go in order. So I will actually put this piece on the top, along the top, and I will pin it in place, but then I will make sure that my seam line intersects those two little points there. That will make it so that this block will look exactly perfect. So again, I'm going to be pinning to the other side so that this is really straight, but I will make sure that my seam line intersects right along that, maybe just a hair away from that point right there. And then when I press, then it will show the point, but not beyond that. And also that and show you what I mean. Okay, so let's peek. I have sewn right next to those points. And then when I press, you can see the whole thing of that. Now this one, you can see just a tiny bit of the black. That is really, really picky. I will probably go back because mine is the sample, so everyone scrutinizes it pretty well, and just take one little more thread past that, and then I'll just for like a tiny bit, like maybe an inch or two before and after, and then I'll open it up and it will be just perfect. Okay, now you can see how picky I was. I am exactly like barely a thread over, but that's going to make that point really sharp and crispy, and then no extra black will be showing. So just those little attentions to detail can make a big difference. If you don't care, then nobody else will either. If you want to be really picky about it, then you can be, but if it doesn't bother you, then it won't bother anybody else. Okay, now I'm going to join this second row and the third row together. Now, here is my trick and my tip, because these lines need to really intersect right there at that tiny little corner. So what I will do is I am going to take a pin, and I will just make that pin come up just a tiny, just right in that corner, as close as I can get it without breaking any threads or anything. I'm just being really gentle so you can see it's right in the corner. Now I'm going to take this one. It doesn't have a natural corner, so I'm going to mark. I'll mark on the back side. And I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark a scant 1/4 inch right there. I'm going to move these out of the way so that you can see a little bit better. But right in that little corner, I'm going to move my ruler off just a tiny bit, and I'll just mark. And the reason why I mark it off just a tiny bit is because the pencil lead will lose just a little bit of the 1/4 inch, like it'll be a little bit more than that. So I'll do that. So then when I'm putting these two together, I'm going to pin right where that intersects, just like this. And I'm right there. These seams will not nest because they are not the way that you sew them. You just press them open. So they don't exactly nest, but, and then I will actually pin on either side just so that it's super secure right there. And then I'll do the same thing for these two intersections, and they both do have an intersection. If there's any play in there, then I will ease it really gently, but there shouldn't be. Now, the other trick is that this corner right here should match up with this corner right here, that little corner. So that's another way that you can put them together without being quite so fiddly, but I find that it's just a little bit easier. And then I will actually sew from this side so that I can make sure that I'm hitting those points pretty exactly. So go ahead and be as fiddly as you want with these. And then before I actually sew it, I will baste these 3 intersections so that I can double check that I'm in the right place. And then I don't even take out the basting stitches. I just sew right over the top of those. They don't need to come out. They won't add any weight to your quilt. Just if they're off, then it's easier to take them out than to take out regular stitches. So I will go ahead and sew those and then come show you the next part. And that'll be with these. And there's the first 3 rows all together. So next we'll do this one, and you can see that this is the intersection. This is an intersection, this one and this one. So I'll just be really careful when I'm lining those up, and again, baste them so that I can make sure that I'm right in the middle of those seams, because I really want this to come out perfect. All right, now we're ready for the last row. And the last row is my favorite one, not just because it is the final one and now we're finished with this super tricky block, but because the only place that you really have to line up besides the start and the end are right here on this little green piece. And you'll just line those up and pin those, and then the front and the end of the seam, and we'll sew that together, and then the block will be done. And just like that, we are finished with our coneflower block, and you can be really proud when you're at this point. Now we just have some partial blocks to do after this, but the techniques are all the same. We'll be using corner square triangles and bias joins for all of it. And then the other block is the beehive block, and we'll get to that in just a second. For our beehive block, we will be making it in 2 pieces again, but we will finally be joining this cute little bee together. And I like to just lay everything out so that we can see kind of where everything goes. And I'll just do it loosely. I won't worry too much that it's like in the exact place, but I'm putting things so that I can see where they go in relation to each other. So these will be lining up finally. This will be under, and I've got all my labels on my blocks. Let me move this down just a little. And then you can see this shorter 7.5 inch piece will go on the top, and then these are all the longer pieces. And then we'll do these 2 longer pieces. This is gonna look a little bit funny, but there is a rhyme and a reason to it. So you can see that it's kind of starting to take shape. This is the beehive, and then these are the bees. And then there's a bunch of backgrounds, and I actually will just put those out as needed. But these 2 are longer because this row is going to be a bias join. And you can see in your instructions, if you look through those before you get started sewing, you'll see that this is a bias join, and it's just like the other one. So we'll take this one. We want the bias join to go ascending up, so we'll put this part towards the top, mark a line, and then sew it together. And then this one will go to it's supposed to go descending down, so that will go together, and then that will make our little opening for the bees to go in. And that is about it. This piece will actually be in a separate piece. You'll understand once we put everything together at the end why we needed to do it separately. But this piece will not really go on top of the beehive. It's its own little section. And you'll see that in the instructions. And then everything else will go together. It's pretty straightforward. I recommend that you do the coneflower blocks first, and then this will be a fun little finishing project. I sure hope you enjoy making these blocks this month. I know that I had a lot of fun designing these blocks, and I know they're a little tricky, but I think they are so worth it. They're worth the extra time and care that you will take to make them, and I think that they're really fun. Have a great week. Have a great month sewing.